Tell me what your life was like before you died.
I met my second husband in 2006, and I was so grateful to find him. I'd been through a messy divorce, had 5 years of living single, and I had some success as a writer. I'd written books on architectural history, and in fact, after our first date, one of my stories, because I had good publicity, one of my stories about one of my new books was written up in the Wall Street Journal, above the fold, no less. So I was very proud that it looked like this happened all the time. Here's this new fellow I'm trying to impress, and I say, I was in the Wall Street Journal today, above the fold. And he was like, wow. So he and I were married 10 years, and I thought it was a good marriage. In fact, in my wedding vows, I thanked God for bringing him into my life. I thought he was the answer to a lifetime of prayers. My first marriage had failed after 24 years. And as anyone who's been through a divorce can tell you, that's hard when you put your best energies, efforts, and prayers into a marriage and it fails. So I really thought happy days had arrived, really and truly. I thought all those hard years were over. And then after about 9.5 years of marriage, came home for lunch one day and ended his life. And as a sensitive soul and a writer, to say I was devastated would be an understatement. But we had a good life. In fact, there are times that I was prone to sadness, typical creative type, ruminate over everything, think too much all the time. And he would frequently tell me, we have a good life. Look at all the wonderful blessings we have in our life. And for him to do this for about 2.5 years, I just lost my mind. In the vernacular of the day, I learned how to mask. I learned how to pretend to be fine, because nobody wants to be around somebody who's like, oh, my life is awful. And I was going out to lunch with friends and, pretending. And, an interesting thing happened. I was at a fancy restaurant somewhere eating by myself on this particular day, but somebody opened a door to my side, and the wind caught the door and it slammed very, very hard. And it slammed so hard and it startled me. And I jumped up out of my seat and I yelled, with children around and everybody else around, I yelled, what the F is wrong with you? And to nobody in particular, but it startled me so badly. And and people were just gaping at me, and I jumped up and ran out of the restaurant because I was so humiliated by him. But I was still pretty messed up. And then 29 months into it, I'd had a bunch of physical symptoms, very disturbing symptoms, including some bleeding and, gynecological problems, blah, blah, blah. And I went to a doctor, and I went to a couple doctors. Actually, I went to 3, and I was diagnosed with cervical cancer stage 2. And I said, God, I was pretty clear on this, heal me or let me go. I meant fast. I didn't mean from some lingering illness. And during a related surgery, somebody made a boo-boo, and then I awakened from that surgery bleeding profusely. It had been a cervical biopsy, and I awakened in the recovery, bleeding a lot. And they told an RN, I said, look, something's gone wrong. I'm 59 years old. I can tell you something's gone wrong. I'm bleeding. Once you get home and lay down, you'll be fine. So 3 times I protested, and 3 times she told me just to go home and lay down. And I did. And once at home, it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I had a friend staying with me. And I told my friend, I said, call an ambulance, I'm bleeding to death. And ambulance came, took me to another hospital, a little ER that was actually not connected to a hospital. And they made more boo-boos. And, I used to tell this in front of live audiences. And when I would tell the part where they gave me a morphine derivative as a drug, I don't know why, but they did, everyone in the audience gasped, because when a patient presents with dropping blood pressure and profuse bleeding, morphine depresses it further. It really does kind of grease the skids to the afterlife, And I had never been in an ambulance, and I get into this ER, and this very kind RN about my age is attending to me, and I was so frightened, because now I've made a decision. Okay, I'm going to live. I've agreed to go to the hospital. And I grabbed this RN's hand and I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she was so compassionate and so motherly. And she grabbed my hand, she squeezed it and got right in my face very, very sweetly, almost as a mother consoling a child, and said, oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. We have many solutions for this. And then they gave me the morphine derivative, and away I went. And the thing is, to the onlooker, it was a pretty peaceful passing. And in my experience, what I was experiencing, the thing is, after they gave me that Dilaudid, I don't know the time. My friend was at my side. I'm on this gurney in a little cubicle in an ER. My friend said that after they gave me the Dilaudid, I just passed right out. And, the thing about that, it was actually Dilaudid morphine derivative. The thing about that is I didn't have much blood volume at that point. So that Dilaudid, I don't know technically if I bled to death or if the Dilaudid was just the final blow to my little heart that's going, I need fluid, I need fluid, I need fluid. And then, that's right, let's finish her off. But my friend said, he looked at the blood pressure cuff, which is, inflating and deflating automatically. And the medical staff have left the room. And he said at one point it said 35 over 20 or 33 over 25 as my blood pressure. Well, which just means you're on your way out. And he stood up to go get help because she's dying. And as he did, my eyes popped open. I don't remember this, but he said, you reached your hands up to heaven and, wiggled your fingers almost like a child reaching for a parent and said something. And he said he got up and stood over me and looked right in my face. And he said, you looked right through me. You were talking to somebody that you could see and nobody else could. And there's a term for this. It's called terminal lucidity. Have you heard of that? That often at the very end of life, we get a burst of energy. What happened next was I fell back on the gurney. I'd been trying to sit up, which is pretty impressive for somebody with a blood pressure of 33 over 25. But I fell back on the gurney, and he said, and then you just went real still. And meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. I felt myself awakening from what seemed like a deep, dreamless state. And man, I was catapulted out of this body. And I mean catapulted, like toast out of a toaster. And I went flying off, and I was floating away in blackness. A lot of people say, could you see your body? No, I couldn't see my body. And I really think that's God's mercy, because I learned later, my friend, the medical staff did come rushing in when they heard the blood pressure alarm going off. And he said they ushered him outside into the, wait outside the little room and brought a crash cart in. He said, actually, it was kind of funny. The nurse came running into the room first, and he said she did a sternal rub. Have you heard of that, where they take their knuckles and rake them over your sternum? It elicits a pain response. If there's any life at all, you'll wiggle or jolt or something. But he said she did that for a minute and nothing. And he said, and then she went over to the blood pressure cuff machine and checked the plug at the outlet, like, well, this thing isn't working. It looks like she's dead. I was catapulted very dramatically. And then as I'm floating in this perfect blackness, and I hear a lot of people talk about the love they feel, I would say the predominant emotion I felt was peace. And I thought, this is great. Everything I am has gone with me. My macabre, goofy sense of humor, my silly little giggle, the sound of my voice. And I thought, what did I leave on that gurney? And I realized the fear, the anxiety, the worries, the woe, everything negative was what I left behind. And what went with me was me, who I really am. And that was very comforting, by the way. That was very comforting to know that everything I really am went with me. This floating went on for some time. And at some point in this blackness, as I'm still floating further and further away. And the thing is, I had always had this inherent fear of the dark. And I remember thinking, I'm in pitch black. I mean, the kind of you can't see your hand in front of you. And I thought, and yet I'm not afraid. So maybe I'm not really afraid of the dark. And very early on in this experience, I felt a massive presence join me. And I mean massive. And she was to my left and much taller than me. And I turned my head up and looked to the left to see her. And I thought, this is interesting. I'm turning my head to the left to look over my left shoulder. And I thought, so I have some sort of form. I'm not just some ethereal spirit floating away. But I turned and I'm smiling, literally with a happy smile. I said, and who are you? And the answer was, before I could even finish the sentence, the answer was immediate. You are the image and likeness. I'm the original. I was like, whoa, that's Genesis 1:25 and 26. We're made in the image and likeness of God. So this went on, and at some point, still floating in this blackness, I felt the presence of what you might call spiritual beings or angels, but they were welcoming me home, and it wasn't with words, but it was with a feeling like, she's back. We're so glad you're back. And if I could sum up the entire experience in 3 words, it would actually be pretty easy, but it would be, welcome home, dearie. My whole life I've been a weirdo and an oddball. I've just been that kid that from the playground to career life, just different, But it was like these people got me, and they were so glad I was back home. So glad. And that was so comforting that I was with my tribe, And it was like they were saying, we know this was a hard one, but you're back. And one of the spiritual beings with me said, remember, your mom told you were given up for dead as an infant. I was 3 weeks old and I contracted a disease, and the doctors sent my mom home and said, this baby's dead. She's not going to survive another couple hours. And yet the next morning, my mom went home and prayed that night. And the next morning, when she came back in, a nun, Catholic hospital, but a nun handed me over to my mom and said, this baby isn't better. She's healed. So the angels in this experience said, you didn't almost die that night. You crossed over then and you were sent back. Well, I remembered in this death experience, the firemen trying to get a gurney in the house, and they couldn't get it up the stairs and around the corner. So, but I remembered, I didn't have a life review, but I remember those firemen trying so hard, because I was still conscious when I was taken out of the house. I remember him trying so hard to be helpful. And I thought, wow, they showed me so much love, a total stranger. And I thought about how much love they showed me. But my predominant feeling really and truly was that I got early release for good behavior. I felt like somebody opened the prison doors and let me out. And then at some point, I don't remember the transition, but at some point I'm no longer floating, but I'm in a white room. And I'm on my feet now. I'm no longer floating, but I'm on my feet in this perfect white room. And about 15 to 20 feet in front of me is a door. And it was shut. I remember being a little disappointed that the door was shut because I thought, hey, I'm supposed to just go through that door. And that door ought to be open for me. As I'm walking through this white room, and it was perfect white, and I observed that there were no light fixtures, no traditional light fixtures. It was just illuminated from within. But I had a spiritual being or an angel with me at this point, and I asked, there was this mist or fog in the room, and I asked about that. It was not just falling, it was encircling and very busy mist around me. And I asked the angelic being with me, I said, I feel like I ought to be able to focus on one of the individual droplets. And the angelic being said, your eyes are not acclimated to this new environment yet, so you can't see it. But what you're seeing, these are particles of light. And that when we go to heaven, we have to be cleansed of the muck. And that was the word that was used, the muck of earth, which is a word I just don't use much in everyday language, but that the muck and the denseness and the heaviness of earth has to be washed. And this was like most akin to a spiritual car wash. And as my friend said, leave your muddy boots at the door. We don't go to heaven with the heaviness of earth. And the other thing that was explained to me very clearly was we have a spiritual identity. And sometimes we get so accustomed to these physical disease process that we think, like, I am a diabetic. I have hepatitis. I have this. We identify with a disease, and that the purpose of this was to strip that away and say, no, that's not your identity. Your real identity is spiritual, child of God. That's who you really are. And so it's kind of a reminder. And the other thing, somewhere as I'm walking, because I see that door and I think, okay, I know the gig. Everybody out of my way, I'm doing the door. Let me out. And as I'm doing that, one of the messages that was very clearly conveyed to me. So while it looks to me like this thing happened and this, it's really hard to say. But at some point in that white room, I was told that if I agreed to go, or if I ended up going, not agreed, but if I ended up going back, that I would be restored to wholeness. And it wasn't said that you'll be healed of the grief, you'll be healed of this disease, but you'll be restored to wholeness. And so I get to the door, and I'm so grateful, and I go to put my right hand up to move through the door. Pretty interested by the fact right-handed on earth and right-handed in heaven. Still that's part of my identity. But I paused and I asked the angel that was with me, or spiritual being, whatever. I said, is this the divine will for my life? And what I was going to say, is this the divine will for my life that a medical mistake sends me on to my reward? And before I could even get, is this the divine? The answer was again immediate, and the answer was no. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's blessings and mercy and grace and love and care. And that was the answer to that third prayer, or the second prayer, that I can't handle any more decisions. This is a pretty big decision. Decide if you go to heaven or stay on earth. And I was told, it's okay. And one of the takeaways for me on this is, if we are trying to do good, if we are trying to do the will of God, we're not going to make a wrong decision. Because even if we take the long way around the barn, we're going to end up back where we need to be. So the healing of the disease process is very important. But, Psalm 23 says, he restoreth my soul. My soul got rebooted. My soul got restored. That's the real healing. And the thing this happened 5 years ago. Next month, this whole thing, the near-death experience occurred. The thing I just thought about in the last 6 months, because this, I don't remember anymore, but the experience continues to unfold. My body was on that gurney. It's my soul or my essence or my spirit that went to heaven. But that's where the healing happened. And when I went back to my body, the cancer was gone. So, it's not my body that got hauled up to heaven for a reboot. It was my consciousness, my spirit, my essence, my soul. So I really believe, and I get in a lot of trouble for saying this too, but I really believe the next great frontier in medicine is going to be spiritual healing. I really do. Forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know, and be kind to yourself. Be gentler with yourself. God is love. Love is God. Also, there's words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Logos, word, God. God loves words. If you're a wordsmith, man, you got it going on. I think God loves words. And I think the biggest thing, because I've been having this thing about, I'm aging, and I look in the mirror and I look at pictures like, oh, you're so old. You're not attractive. And then I think you're talking about God's creation. So I think we have to be real careful the words we speak over ourselves. So God is the word, and words are God, and words are very powerful. Love alone is life.